It started with a honk. Not the polite, casual kind you get when someone's in a hurry, but the sharp, accusatory honk that rattled my nerves before I even opened my front door. When I stepped outside, coffee in hand, the sight that greeted me was surreal. Karen, my neighbor, the one with an obsession for rules and a glaring dislike for anyone daring to park within 3 inches of a pristine garden gnome, was glaring at me like I'd just declared war. "You can't park there," she snapped, waving her hands like a conductor of chaos. "This is my property." I blinked, slowly. My mind was trying to compute what her lips were forming into words. My driveway? She thought my driveway was hers? I laughed nervously, pointing to the no trespassing sign I'd personally painted, the one that clearly marked the boundary. Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she whipped out her phone and started dialing. The street filled with a low hum of curiosity from neighbors peeking out their windows. In the span of less than a minute, my peaceful suburban morning had become an episode of some reality show I didn't audition for. By the time the police arrived, Karen was already pacing up and down my driveway, reciting a long, self-written manifesto about neighborhood etiquette, property lines, and how I, apparently, was the embodiment of chaos incarnate. The officers, thankfully, listened politely, took notes, and left with a friendly warning. "It's your driveway. She doesn't get to claim it." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought wrong. 24 hours later, the HOA showed up at her door. And just like that, Karen, the self-appointed guardian of suburban order, was the one being escorted off her property. But that's only the beginning, because what followed in the days after was pure, chaotic suburban madness. The next morning, I woke to a strange calm, an eerie quiet that only comes after a minor apocalypse. The street was empty, the usual hum of lawnmowers and barking dogs replaced by an almost theatrical silence. My driveway, the battleground of the previous day, felt strangely victorious. I could practically hear it sigh in relief, like it had been freed from some invisible tyranny. Then came the texts. "Oh my gosh. Did you hear what happened to Karen?" Read the first message from my neighbor across the street, Linda, whose curiosity could rival a tabloid journalist. "I can't believe the HOA actually kicked her out," texted another. By 10 a.m., my phone was buzzing nonstop. Some neighbors were congratulatory, others curious, and a few were outright scheming. The news had traveled faster than wildfire in a California drought. I tried to respond politely, but every ping seemed to pull me deeper into the chaos that was now officially Karen-less suburban life. Meanwhile, the HOA had made a very public announcement. In a newsletter that would normally be devoted to lawn maintenance tips and quiet hours, they had issued a statement about upholding community standards and ensuring compliance with property rules. Translation: Karen had crossed a line, hard, and the board had the paperwork to prove it. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. By mid-morning, neighbors had started showing up at my driveway, not in protest, but in solidarity or maybe just to witness history. One of them, a retired cop named Jerry, leaned on my fence and said with a grin, "I've seen a lot of things in this neighborhood, but Karen versus a driveway? This takes the cake." I laughed, nervously, wondering if I should have worn a medal or at least prepared a victory speech. But the real chaos came from Karen's social media storm. She posted videos, long rants, and even a blurry photo of what she claimed were illegal markings on my driveway. Within hours, her post had gone viral in the tiny, fiercely opinionated ecosystem of our HOA's Facebook group. Comments ranged from "finally," "someone put her in her place," to "you can't just evict someone like that." And yet, through it all, the underlying tension didn't fade. I realized that having Karen gone didn't make my neighborhood peaceful. It just created a vacuum, a simmering energy ready to explode in new, unpredictable ways. That evening, as I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, I noticed a subtle change in the street. Cars were parked slightly differently. Dogs barked with extra gusto. Kids rode their bikes in circles, daring each other to test boundaries. The atmosphere was charged, and every little movement seemed amplified. My driveway, once a simple slab of concrete, had become a symbol, a monument to the absurdity and triumph of suburban life. And then it happened. A loud crash echoed from 2 houses down. I ran toward the sound, half expecting another neighborhood dispute. But what I found was stranger. A delivery truck had somehow gotten stuck in someone's hedge, and the driver was desperately trying to extricate it without destroying the mailbox. Neighbors gathered, shouting, "Move the car," and called the HOA, as though the world had become one continuous episode of chaos reality TV. Standing there, watching the absurdity unfold, I realized something crucial. The Karen incident wasn't just a driveway dispute. It had become a catalyst, a lens through which every quirk, every petty argument, and every hidden rivalry in our neighborhood was suddenly amplified. And somewhere in the distance, I knew this was only the beginning. I thought Karen's eviction would be the end of it. I thought wrong. By the third morning, it was clear Karen wasn't planning to vanish quietly into the suburban sunset. Her Facebook post had evolved into a daily tirade, complete with blurry evidence of supposed driveway encroachments and exaggerated claims about HOA corruption. She even tagged neighbors who had dared congratulate me. Suddenly, the quiet suburban streets were alive with digital skirmishes, notifications pinging like tiny fire alarms on my phone. Then came the first physical move. I was watering my front lawn when I noticed something unusual. My mailbox had been covered in bright pink sticky notes. Each one was scrawled with angry, looping handwriting. "This is war. Your driveway, my night maze. Justice will prevail." I stared at them, unsure if I should laugh or call a cleanup crew. The notes, of course, were stapled on, requiring at least 15 minutes of careful peeling to avoid ripping the mailbox apart. The neighbors noticed immediately. From behind her hedges, Mrs. Patel gave me a thumbs up, whispering, I knew she wouldn't take this lightly. Across the street, Jerry, the retired cop, chuckled. She's got the flair for drama. I'll give her that. By noon, Karen's retaliation had escalated. A large, suspicious package appeared on my porch. I didn't touch it. Instead, I called the HOA. After a tense conversation, the HOA board agreed to inspect it. Inside the box, nothing dangerous, but dozens of miniature, handmade signs that read "Driveway Thief and Karen's Revenge." Clearly, Karen was committed to psychological warfare. Then the neighbors got involved. Some, emboldened by my apparent victory, started putting up their own protective signs. "Beware, Karen may strike" appeared on lampposts. Lawn flamingos were strategically deployed as sentries. What was meant to be a minor driveway incident had metastasized into full-blown neighborhood theater. The HOA called an emergency meeting. The community center was packed, tensions running higher than any 4th of July fireworks. Karen had managed to rally a few supporters via social media, showing up with homemade signs and a dramatic story about property rights being systematically violated. On the other side were homeowners who had witnessed a driveway showdown firsthand, many of them incredulous that anyone could claim someone else's driveway. The meeting began calmly enough. The HOA president, a mild-mannered woman named Diane, tried to explain procedure and reiterate that Karen's eviction was legal and final. But Karen, of course, would have none of it. "You can't just silence me," she shouted, waving a crumpled HOA notice in the air. "This community is corrupt, and I will not be bullied." It was like watching a reality TV contestant refuse to accept the judge's decision. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted into whispers, mutters, and a few stifled laughs. Jerry leaned over to me, shaking his head. "She's really going all in on this." Karen supporters tried to interject, waving their own signs and citing obscure HOA regulations. The chaos reached a peak when someone accidentally knocked over the water cooler, sending a cascade of plastic cups onto the floor. Amid the yelling, I realized that the entire meeting had turned into a chaotic performance art piece of suburban conflict. Eventually, Diane restored some semblance of order and reminded everyone that Karen had been legally removed from the neighborhood. She stressed that any further harassment or attempts to intimidate other residents would result in fines or even police involvement. Karen, predictably, did not take this news gracefully. She stormed out, muttering something about the tyranny of concrete and the oppression of suburban conformity. After that, I hoped things might finally settle down. I was wrong again. Over the next week, Karen tried several more strategies. There was a driveway surveillance campaign, in which she parked across the street and stared at my property for hours on end, apparently hoping to catch me breaking some rule. She even sent me a passive-aggressive gift basket with a note reading, "For the illegal occupant of your own driveway." The basket included a small replica gavel, some pink construction paper labeled evidence, and a single, lonely packet of sunflower seeds. I wasn't sure if it was meant as a peace offering or a threat. Neighbors reacted in different ways. Some laughed openly, sharing photos of the bizarre gift basket on social media. Others were more cautious, whispering that Karen might escalate further. Jerry advised installing security cameras, which I did, partly for protection and partly to document what I suspected would become legendary footage of suburban absurdity. Despite all this, I began to notice something unexpected. Without Karen's constant interference, the neighborhood seemed to take a collective breath. People were freer to do minor projects, like repainting fences or planting gardens, without fear of immediate judgment. The tension had shifted. Karen's obsession with control had inadvertently united the rest of us. It was in this environment of fragile peace that I started to notice subtle signs of victory. One morning, as I stepped outside, I saw a moving truck parked in front of what used to be Karen's house. A pair of movers were unloading furniture, and the front yard was suspiciously empty, save for a few forlorn garden gnomes. It appeared that the HOA had followed through on their enforcement. Karen, who had created so much drama in such a short time, was finally leaving. Still, I couldn't relax completely. Karen had left a mark, not on my driveway, but on the neighborhood psyche. Every honk, every glance, and every slightly misplaced bicycle felt like a reminder that suburbia could be chaotic, especially when fueled by someone with Karen's intensity. And yet, there was a strange satisfaction in watching the neighborhood slowly return to normal. The pink sticky notes were gone, the miniature signs were discarded, and life began to resemble something closer to what it had been before the Great Driveway War. But I knew better than to assume that suburbia was ever truly calm. Not after Karen. By the time Karen's moving truck disappeared down the cul-de-sac, I thought the drama had finally ended. I pictured a quiet street, the neighbors sipping iced tea on their porches, the only sounds being the occasional bark or the hum of a lawnmower. I even half-joked to myself that I might get a medal for surviving Karen. The very next morning, my hopes were rudely interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a drone buzzing overhead. I looked up, squinting, and sure enough, a small, black drone hovered above my driveway, camera aimed directly at my property. My phone buzzed with a notification, a live feed from a neighborhood Facebook group, captioned, "Driveway Watch 2.0. Did Karen leave evidence?" I groaned. Even in her absence, Karen had left a mark, or rather, her minions. Someone in the neighborhood had apparently decided to continue her surveillance campaign, claiming to document the last 24 hours of driveway tyranny as a public service. By mid-morning, the Karen legacy became painfully clear. Lawn flamingos, strategically positioned during her reign of terror, were now scattered across several yards like tiny plastic sentinels. Neighbors were in an unspoken contest, seeing who could maintain the most elaborate anti-Karen defenses, ranging from strategically placed gnomes to homemade driveway safety patrol signs. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that suburbia had officially turned into a stage for passive-aggressive theater. Then came the HOA's follow-up meeting. I thought it would be routine, reaffirm the rules, discuss the aftermath, and finally breathe a sigh of relief. I was wrong again. The meeting began with a tense silence. The HOA president, Diane, cleared her throat and said, "Now that Karen has officially left the neighborhood, we need to discuss the impact of her actions and how to prevent similar incidents in the future." A hand shot up immediately. Mr. Simmons, a neighbor known for his flair for dramatic gestures. Impact? Diane, the impact is massive. My mailbox is still traumatized. My lawn flamingos are displaced. And I'm pretty sure my dog now fears plastic gnomes more than squirrels. Laughter erupted in the room, but the message was clear. Karen's chaos hadn't ended. It had infected the neighborhood psyche, leaving everyone slightly paranoid, slightly competitive, and entirely entertained. Then, Diane introduced the official HOA decision. Karen had been fined for multiple violations. Her eviction was permanent, and any attempt to return would be met with immediate legal action. The room collectively cheered. Some people clapped. Jerry gave me a conspiratorial wink, muttering, "Victory tastes sweeter than iced tea on a hot day." But the real twist came later that evening. I was enjoying a quiet walk around the block when I noticed a moving van parked at the far end of the street. Curiosity piqued. I walked closer and froze. The driver waved awkwardly. "Are you the neighbor of Karen Thompson?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "Well, she's trying to move back. Claims she forgot something important. Says she'll only be here briefly." My heart sank. I thought we were done. We weren't. Within hours, word spread like wildfire. The Karen Returns post on the neighborhood Facebook group exploded with theories, memes, and advice. Some neighbors plotted creative deterrence. Others just watched, captivated by the drama. A few brave souls even formed a neighborhood watch team, patrolling driveways and taking turns protecting properties from potential Karen incursions. I tried to maintain calm, but it was hard. Every rustle of leaves felt like a potential invasion. Every car that slowed down seemed suspicious, and every mailbox suddenly looked like it could be a target. The psychological warfare Karen had inadvertently created lingered in the air like fog, thick, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Amid all this, I began to notice subtle shifts in the neighborhood dynamic. For one, people were talking to each other more. Not just the usual small talk about weather and lawn care, but real conversations about rules, boundaries, and how to coexist with someone like Karen, or how to avoid becoming one. The chaos had forced us to unite in a way I never expected. Even more surprising was the humor. We started sharing stories of Karen's absurd antics, from the pink sticky notes to the tiny gavel gift basket. It became something of a local legend. Children in the neighborhood played driveway defender, pretending to defend their homes from imaginary neighbors with unreasonable claims. I caught myself laughing at the memory of the pink sticky notes while watering my lawn, realizing that humor was perhaps the neighborhood's most effective coping mechanism. Yet, despite the levity, I remained wary. Karen's potential return loomed over us like a storm cloud. That night, I double-checked the locks, installed extra motion sensor lights, and even considered asking Jerry to help with some neighborhood surveillance training. If Karen was coming back, I wanted to be ready. By the weekend, it became clear that Karen's brief return might be more of a commitment than she let on. Several neighbors reported sightings, her inspecting the curb lines, taking notes on mailbox placement, and even sketching diagrams of driveway angles. Each sighting sent ripples through the community, with people whispering in doorways and texting frantic updates to the group chat. Through it all, I learned a few important things. Driveways are sacred territory. Who knew that a patch of concrete could inspire such passion? Neighborhood unity is forged in chaos. Without Karen, we might have remained polite strangers waving from behind hedges. With Karen, we became a team, however dysfunctional. Humor is essential. Laughter became our weapon against stress, turning sticky notes and flamingos into symbols of resilience. As I sat on my porch that night, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, I realized that suburban life had changed forever. Karen had left her mark, not just on the HOA records, not just on driveways and mailboxes, but on our collective consciousness. The chaos, the drama, and the absurdity had become part of our shared story. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of a moving truck engine starting. Karen wasn't gone yet. The next morning, the neighborhood awoke to an eerie, almost cinematic calm. It was a kind of quiet that set your nerves on edge, like the moment in a horror movie just before something terrible happens. I had barely stepped outside when I saw it. Karen's moving truck parked at the far end of the cul-de-sac, its engine idling, ominous and defiant. I tried to stay calm, but the hair on the back of my neck bristled. From behind my curtains, I could see Karen hopping out, clipboard in hand, surveying the street like a general preparing for battle. She wore her signature frown, the one that had haunted the neighborhood for weeks. I realized immediately that this wasn't a casual stop. This was a full-scale comeback. Within minutes, the news had spread. By 9 a.m., neighbors were out in full force. Jerry, ever the retired cop, had stationed himself strategically near the fire hydrant, giving what he called a preventive advisory. Mrs. Patel had deployed 2 inflatable flamingos, her security squad, in her front yard. Even the children had formed an impromptu driveway defense league, riding bikes and scooters in patrol patterns. Karen wasted no time. She began a meticulous inspection of every driveway, measuring, pointing, and scribbling notes in a notebook. She stopped abruptly in front of mine, crouched dramatically, and waved her arms like she was performing some ancient ritual. "You," she shouted, addressing my driveway as if it was sentient. "You will pay for your crimes." At this point, even I had to laugh. My driveway, however, remained stubbornly silent. Her presence immediately sparked a frenzy of neighborly interaction. People whispered in clusters, taking bets on what Karen would do next. Some were sympathetic, though their sympathy was usually expressed behind hands or through wry glances. Others had fully embraced the absurdity of it all, taking photos, live-streaming the spectacle, and posting running commentary on the neighborhood Facebook group. By 10 a.m., there were memes, actual memes, comparing Karen to a vengeful mythological figure, the driveway goddess of suburbia. Karen's escalation didn't stop there. She started creating evidence boards, taping photos, measurements, and post-it notes onto large cardboard panels. She even brought a small folding table and chair, claiming she needed a command center to oversee the investigation. Her dedication to petty vengeance was impressive in a terrifying sort of way. By noon, the HOA had intervened once again. Diane arrived, clipboard in hand, attempting to reason with Karen. "Karen, your presence is not authorized," Diane said firmly. "You have been evicted. Any further intrusion will result in legal action." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Evicted? This is tyranny. This is an assault on my rights as a concerned citizen." Her supporters, a handful of neighbors she had somehow rallied back online, shouted in agreement, waving miniature protest signs. Other residents booed, clapping ironically, and one brave soul, Mr. Simmons, started reading a citizen's guide to driveway ownership in a dramatic, booming voice. It was chaos, pure suburban theater, and I was stuck in the middle of it all. Determined to end her campaign once and for all, Diane called in reinforcements. 2 security officers from a private neighborhood patrol service. Their arrival only escalated the spectacle. Karen began arguing with them about jurisdiction, legality, and the moral imperative of driveway oversight. The children waved toy swords in mock battle. The flamingos quivered in the wind. Then came the turning point. A gust of wind swept down the cul-de-sac, sending Karen's evidence boards tumbling like dominoes. Post-its flew across lawns. Her clipboard skidded into a flower bed. For the first time that day, Karen appeared genuinely frustrated. She tried to retrieve her materials, but the spectacle had become public. People were filming, neighbors were laughing, and a stray dog had decided to chase the flying post-its, adding to the chaos. Somewhere in the background, Jerry muttered, "Even nature's against her." I had to agree. Finally, Diane spoke up. "Karen, please. You are officially trespassing. Leave now, or the HOA and local authorities will take further action." Karen's supporters started to murmur. The wind had toppled the grandeur of her mission. Even the drone that had been hovering overhead seemed to falter in the gusts, its camera wobbling. Karen looked around, realizing that her aura of dominance was evaporating. Then, in a surprising twist, she did something almost poetic. With a dramatic flourish, Karen swept her arms across her evidence boards, gathered her papers, and, despite a final outburst about tyranny and oppression, she retreated to her truck. Engines revved, tires screeched, and just like that, she was gone. The neighborhood exhaled collectively. The children cheered. The flamingos seemed to relax. My driveway, battered but victorious, gleamed under the midday sun as though acknowledging its own resilience. In the aftermath, the HOA moved quickly to reinforce rules and prevent similar incidents. Karen's eviction was codified in legal documents, her potential for return legally barred, and any future disputes regarding driveways were officially regulated. The neighborhood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the stories of Karen's last stand would live on. By the end of the day, I realized something important. The Karen saga wasn't just about a driveway. It was about boundaries, community, and the strange ways that small conflicts can escalate into legend. It was about how chaos, even when absurd, can unite people. And it was about resilience, the kind that allows a neighborhood, a driveway, and even a few flamingos to survive the storm. Even so, as I sat on my porch that evening, sipping a well-earned glass of wine, I kept one eye on the far end of the street. Karen might be gone, but the lessons and the memories were permanently etched into our suburban consciousness. Because in a world where pink sticky notes can spark chaos and lawn flamingos can become symbols of defiance, you never truly know when the next absurdity will arrive. And somewhere deep down, I knew the neighborhood and my driveway would never be quite the same again. The sun rose over the cul-de-sac, bathing the street in golden light, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt normal. Not calm exactly. Suburban life rarely allows that, but normal in a way that meant we could finally exhale. Karen was gone. Her truck, her gavel, her post-it notes, her handmade signs, everything that had haunted our neighborhood like a vengeful spirit, was gone. Permanently. I stepped onto my driveway, surveying the battlefield. The concrete looked unassuming, almost smug in its silence, as if it had silently borne witness to the absurdity of human behavior and emerged victorious. I could almost hear it whisper, "Told you I was mine." Neighbors began cautiously emerging from their houses. Jerry gave me a thumbs up from across the street, wearing a grin that could only be described as, "I survived Karen, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt," if T-shirts had existed in his mind. Mrs. Patel, in a rare gesture of cooperation, had rearranged her flamingos in a neat semicircle, their pink forms now symbols of victory rather than intimidation. Even the children, who had been our driveway defense league, appeared on their bikes, waving hello as if the threat had finally passed. The HOA held an emergency but celebratory meeting later that morning. Diane, usually reserved and methodical, allowed herself a rare smile. "The Karen incident is officially closed," she announced. "All fines have been collected, all eviction orders enforced, and all neighborhood surveillance measures can be returned to normal." Applause erupted. Not the polite, quiet kind that accompanies a board meeting, but genuine, loud, celebratory applause. People cheered for the victory of rules, of order, and yes, of my driveway. Someone even brought cupcakes, which I suspected were an ironic nod to Karen's obsession with justice and evidence. For a few days, life returned to a kind of mundane bliss. No drones hovered above our homes. No sticky notes appeared mysteriously on mailboxes. Lawn flamingos were left to roam their own territories peacefully, and I could water my garden without fearing a dramatic confrontation. The neighborhood, collectively, exhaled. Yet, the effects of Karen's reign were subtle but enduring. Conversations had changed. When neighbors passed each other on walks, they no longer made small talk about weather or recycling schedules. Instead, the topics ranged from driveway etiquette to HOA regulations, and occasionally the absurdity of Karen's gift basket with its lone packet of sunflower seeds and tiny gavel. Humor had become our armor, our way of processing the chaos we had endured. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on my porch with Jerry, who had become an unexpected co-strategist during the Karen crisis. We were discussing the lessons learned. "Rule 1, he said, tapping his finger on the armrest. "Never underestimate a neighbor with too much time and a clipboard." "Rule 2, I added, install security cameras early. You never know when your driveway will become the center of international-level drama, or at least local Facebook drama." "And Rule 3, he said with a grin, "flamingos make excellent psychological warfare tools." We laughed. It was the first laughter in weeks that felt unburdened by fear or paranoia. Life settled into a new rhythm. Neighborhood kids played without fear of being scolded for minor infractions. Families tended gardens with more freedom. Even small disputes, like whether a hedge was 2 inches too close to the curb, were now handled with calm discussion rather than whispered threats. Karen had left a mark, but in her absence, a strange kind of cohesion had emerged. We were wary, yes, but we were also united, bonded by shared absurdity. Months later, I caught sight of a new family moving into the house 2 doors down from mine. I braced for potential drama, only to see a cheerful, completely reasonable couple unloading boxes without a gavel, without post-it notes, and without any visible vendetta. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of relief. Even the HOA seemed to have learned something. Meetings were still procedural, but the energy had shifted from tense enforcement to proactive communication. Rules were clearly posted, and boundaries were discussed calmly, though the occasional reference to the Karen era was met with knowing laughter. Reflecting on everything, I realized the saga had taught me more than I expected. Boundaries matter, and standing up for them can be surprisingly dramatic. Community matters, even when it's tested by absurd challenges. Humor matters, because when chaos erupts, laughter is often the best defense. And finally, driveways are sacred. Never forget that. That evening, I stood on my porch, surveying the cul-de-sac in peace. The wind rustled the leaves, the sun dipped low, and everything looked ordinary, safe, even. My driveway was quiet. The flamingos were still, and the children were indoors, probably inventing new games that didn't involve vigilant surveillance of neighbors. As I closed the gate behind me, I caught myself smiling. Suburban life could be petty, absurd, and occasionally maddening, but it could also be funny, strangely beautiful, and deeply communal. All it took was surviving Karen. Somewhere down the street, I noticed Mrs. Patel adjusting her flamingos once more. A subtle salute, perhaps, to the victory we had all shared. I raised my own glass of iced tea in response, a silent toast to the ridiculous, the triumphant, and the utterly human. The driveway remained, steadfast and unyielding, a monument to suburban resilience. And for the first time in months, I felt that life, messy, chaotic, hilarious, and full of sticky notes, was finally, truly back to normal. Of course, knowing our neighborhood, normal was always a relative term. But for now, it was perfect enough.